I'm Fiona, 34 female. I'm an architect, and for the past decade, my entire life has revolved around the principles of structure, design, and permanence. I live in a house I designed myself, a 3-bedroom sanctuary with clean lines and big windows that I painstakingly paid for with long hours and sacrificed weekends. It was my fortress, the one place in the world that was entirely mine, until I made the mistake of letting family dynamics compromise its very foundation. My brother and his pregnant girlfriend turned my sanctuary into a battleground, and I was about to learn that the strongest structures are not made of steel and concrete, but of resolve. Before this story unfolds, I'd love to connect with you. Please let me know in the comments where you're watching from and what time it is in your corner of the world. It's amazing to see how far these stories can travel. My brother John is 5 years younger than me. Growing up, I was always the responsible one, the planner, while he was the dreamer, drifting from one passion to another without ever quite landing. I loved him fiercely, and that love often translated into a sense of duty. When our parents moved to a retirement community in another state a few years ago, John was still figuring things out, working gig economy jobs and living in a cramped apartment with a roommate he couldn't stand. I had just finished building my house, and the 2 spare bedrooms felt cavernous and empty, so I made him an offer. He could move into one of the guest rooms rent-free for 6 months. The deal was simple. He would save up enough for a deposit on his own place, get his feet under him, and I'd get to have my little brother around for a while. It felt like a perfect, temporary solution. The first year went by smoothly. 6 months turned into 12, but I didn't mind. He was respectful of the space, helped with chores, and it was nice having company. Then he met Megan. At first, I was thrilled for him. Megan was bubbly and energetic, and she seemed to adore John. When she started staying over, I was happy to welcome her. She worked part-time at a retail store in the mall, and she and John seemed to be building a future together. After about 6 months of dating, John asked if she could officially move in. He explained that her lease was up, and by pooling their resources in my house, they could save money for their future much faster. I hesitated for a moment. This was a significant step beyond my original offer, but John was my only sibling, and seeing him so happy and settled was all I ever wanted. I agreed, with one clear condition. They had to create a serious financial plan and a timeline for moving out. They both agreed enthusiastically, promising they'd be out within a year, 2 at the absolute maximum. The first few months with both of them were manageable. There were minor annoyances, of course. Megan was messier than John, leaving clothes in the living room and half-empty mugs on my custom-built countertops. She treated the house less like a shared space and more like a hotel. My pantry staples would disappear, my expensive shampoo would be half-empty, and the thermostat was constantly being adjusted. I tried to address these things gently, framing them as conversations about house rules, but Megan would always give a breezy apology that felt more like a dismissal. John, caught in the middle, would just shrug and say, "That's just how Megan is," as if that were a valid excuse. I bit my tongue more often than I should have, telling myself it was temporary and that creating conflict would only make the living situation unbearable for everyone. My best friend, Rebecca, a lawyer with a no-nonsense attitude, warned me. "You're being a doormat, Fiona," she said over coffee one afternoon. "They're adults. You're enabling them to avoid responsibility." I knew she was right, but the thought of kicking out my own brother felt cruel. The dynamic shifted dramatically when Megan announced she was pregnant. The news was a happy surprise, and I was genuinely excited to become an aunt. I threw them a small celebration dinner and even started sketching out ideas for a nursery, thinking I could help them design a space in their future home. But Megan's pregnancy seemed to amplify her sense of entitlement tenfold. Suddenly, my home wasn't just a place they were staying. It was, in her mind, the future home of their family. She started talking about baby-proofing the house and turning the office into the nursery. Each time, I would gently redirect her, reminding her, "That's a great idea for when you and John get your own place." She would just smile tightly and change the subject. Her comments became more frequent and more presumptuous. She began complaining about my decor, calling it too sterile for a baby. She suggested we should sell my impractical, white sofa and get something more family-friendly. John never corrected her. He would just stand by, looky. NG uncomfortable but utterly silent. His loyalty clearly shifting from the sister who was housing him to the woman who was carrying his child. The atmosphere in the house grew tense. I started feeling like a guest in my own home, tiptoeing around Megan's moods and her ever-expanding list of demands. She developed an aversion to the smell of coffee, so I stopped brewing it in the mornings and started buying it on my way to work. She claimed my habit of working late in my home office disturbed her sleep, even though her room was on the opposite side of the house. I found myself retreating to my bedroom as soon as I got home from work, just to avoid the friction. The breaking point, the moment I realized this situation was completely unsustainable, came about a week before the confrontation in the kitchen. I had hosted a small dinner party for a few colleagues. Megan had initially agreed to stay in her room, but halfway through the meal, she emerged and proceeded to complain loudly about the noise and the inconsiderate timing of my gathering. She made a scene in front of my boss, and I was mortified. The next morning, I sat John down and told him things had to change. "This isn't working, John," I said, my voice shaking with frustration. "You and Megan need to find your own place. The baby is coming and you need to be settled. I'll even help you with the deposit." John looked panicked. He promised he would talk to her, that he'd get things under control. But in his eyes, I saw not a man ready to take responsibility, but a boy looking for the easiest way out. His talk, whatever it was, did nothing. In fact, it seemed to have made things infinitely worse. The week following my ultimatum to John was thick with an unspoken tension. Megan was icily polite, speaking to me only when absolutely necessary, her eyes holding a glint of something I couldn't quite decipher. It was a cold, calculating look that made the hairs on my arms stand up. John, for his part, avoided me entirely. He would leave for his driving shifts before I woke up and come home long after I had retired to my room. Any attempt I made to ask him about their apartment search was met with vague mumbles about looking into it. I felt a storm brewing, but I foolishly believed it was a storm of packing boxes and moving trucks. I thought my firm stance had finally pushed them into action. I had no idea they weren't planning on moving out, they were planning on pushing me out. The day it all came crashing down started like any other Tuesday. I had a demanding workday, dealing with a difficult client who kept requesting impossible changes to a blueprint. By the time I got home, I was mentally and physically exhausted. All I wanted was a quiet evening with a simple dinner and a glass of wine. I walked into the kitchen and found Megan standing at the island, looking through a catalog of baby furniture. She didn't look up when I came in. "Hey, Megan," I said, forcing a pleasant tone. I dropped my keys into the ceramic bowl on the counter, the familiar clink a comforting sound of being home. "Tough day." She finally looked up, her expression unreadable. "Fiona, we need to talk," she said, her voice devoid of its usual bubbly affectation. It was flat and serious. My stomach clenched. I assumed this was it, the conversation where they would tell me they had found an apartment and give me their move-out date. I leaned against the counter, trying to appear relaxed. "Okay," I said. "What's up?" She closed the catalog and folded her hands over her small but growing baby bump. She took a deep breath, as if steeling herself for a difficult but necessary task. "John and I have been talking," she began, "and we've made a decision. With the baby coming, we need stability. We need a safe and permanent home." I nodded, encouragingly. "I completely agree. That's why I said I'd be happy to help with a deposit once you find a place." A strange, pitying smile touched her lips. "That's the thing, Fiona. We've realized that moving right now would be too stressful and, frankly, financially irresponsible. This house is perfect. It's safe, it's in a good neighborhood, and it's big enough for our family to grow." My heart started to beat a little faster. I could feel where this was going, but my mind refused to accept it. "It is a great house," I said carefully, my voice becoming strained. "And you'll find something just as wonderful, I'm sure." That's when she dropped the bomb. "We're not going to find another place," she said, her voice hardening. "We're staying here. This will be our baby's home." I stared at her, dumbfounded. The sheer audacity of the statement was like a physical blow. I must have looked as bewildered as I felt because she continued, her tone shifting from serious to condescending, as if explaining something to a simple-minded child. "You need to move out immediately," she stated, not requested. "I'm pregnant, and my doctor says I need to avoid stress. I can't have strangers around my baby. It's not healthy." I finally found my voice, a choked laugh escaping my lips. "Strangers? Megan, this is my house. I am not a stranger here. I am the owner." She didn't even flinch. It was as if she had rehearsed this, anticipating my every reaction. "Not anymore," she said calmly. "You're a single woman, you have no attachments. You can easily find a small apartment to rent, but we are a family. This house belongs to us now, not you." The words echoed in the kitchen, my kitchen, the one I had designed with its custom cabinetry and quartz countertops. "This house belongs to us." The "us" was a dagger, twisting in the wound of my generosity. It was clear she saw John and herself as the rightful heirs to my life's work, and I was merely a temporary inconvenience. "Where is John?" I demanded, my voice rising with a mixture of rage and disbelief. "I want to hear this from him." As if on cue, my brother walked into the kitchen. He wouldn't meet my eyes. He stood next to Megan, placing a protective hand on her shoulder. He looked pale and miserable, but resolute. "John," I pleaded, searching his face for any sign of the brother I grew up with. "Are you hearing this? Tell me she's joking." He finally looked at me, his expression a miserable cocktail of guilt and defiance. "Fiona, it's just what's best for the baby," he mumbled, his voice barely a whisper. "Megan's right. You can find another place easily. We can't." The betrayal was absolute. It wasn't just Megan, the entitled girlfriend I barely knew. It was my brother, my own blood, standing in my kitchen and backing her up as she tried to steal my home, my life, right out from under me. He was choosing her and their unborn child over me in the most brutal way imaginable. I felt a cold fury wash over me, eclipsing the hurt and shock. "Get out," I said, my voice dangerously quiet. "Both of you, get out of my house. Now." Megan scoffed. "You don't get it, do you? We're not going anywhere. You are." She picked up her catalog and walked out of the kitchen, with John trailing behind her like a lost puppy. I was left standing alone, trembling in the heart of my home, which had just been declared enemy territory. The night after the kitchen confrontation was the longest of my life. I didn't sleep. I sat on my bed, the door locked, listening to the muted sounds of John and Megan moving about the house as if they owned it. I could hear the television, the murmur of their voices, the flush of a toilet. Every normal domestic sound felt like a violation. They were living their lives in my space while I was a prisoner in my own bedroom. My mind raced, cycling through disbelief, rage, and a profound, aching sadness. My own brother, how could he do this? I sent a frantic text to Rebecca, "Emergency, call me as soon as you get this." My phone buzzed at 7 a.m. It was Rebecca. "Fiona, what's wrong? You sound awful." I poured out the whole story, my voice cracking as I recounted Megan's unbelievable demands and John's spineless compliance. Rebecca was silent for a moment after I finished, and the silence was more terrifying than any outburst. When she finally spoke, her voice was all business. "Okay, first, do not engage with them. Do not argue. Do not say another word to them. Second, get out of the house. Go to work, go to a coffee shop, go anywhere. Just leave. We need to handle this legally, not emotionally. I'll clear my afternoon. Meet me at my office at 2 p.m. Her calm, authoritative tone was a lifeline. It gave me a plan, a single step to take. I got dressed, grabbed my laptop bag, and walked out of my bedroom. Megan and John were in the kitchen making breakfast. They looked up as I passed, their expressions wary. I ignored them, walked straight out the front door without a word, and drove away from my own home, feeling like a refugee. The hours until my meeting with Rebecca were agonizing. I tried to work at a local cafe, but I couldn't focus. I just stared at my screen, the words of my project proposals blurring into an incoherent mess. The scene from the kitchen replayed in my head on a loop. This house belongs to us now. The sheer, unadulterated entitlement was breathtaking. I had always tried to be a good sister. I had supported John through countless failed ventures, lent him money I never saw again, and opened my home to him without a second thought. This was my reward. being told I was a stranger in the house I had built from the ground up. When I finally walked into Rebecca's office, I felt like a shell of myself. She took one look at my face, came around her desk, and gave me a firm hug. "We're going to fix this," she said, her voice full of conviction. "They have picked a fight with the wrong woman and, more importantly, with her lawyer best friend." She led me to a chair, and for the next hour she asked me a series of precise questions. When did they move in? Was there a lease agreement? There wasn't, a fact that made me feel incredibly stupid. Were they paying rent or contributing to bills? John occasionally gave me a couple $100s, but there was no formal arrangement. Had I ever given them anything in writing that suggested they could stay indefinitely? I answered no to that, a small spark of relief in my sea of anxiety. "Okay," Rebecca said, leaning back in her chair. "Legally, they are tenants at will or lodgers since they share a house with the owner. That's good for you. It means we don't have to go through a lengthy eviction process like with a standard lease. However, you can't just throw them out. We have to give them proper, written notice to vacate. 30 days is standard." My heart sank. 30 more days of them in my house? It felt like an eternity. But Rebecca held up a hand. "But first," she said, "you need to go home. You need to secure your personal belongings. Documents, jewelry, anything valuable or sentimental. And you need to see if they've done anything else." I left her office with a clear set of instructions and a knot of dread in my stomach. The thought of going back to that house was terrifying, but Rebecca was right. I needed to face them. I drove home, my hands gripping the steering wheel. As I pulled into my driveway, I noticed something odd. A new, shiny brass lock on my front door. My heart plummeted. I fumbled for my keys, my hands shaking. I tried my key in the lock. It wouldn't turn. I tried the deadbolt. Same result. They had changed the locks. They had actually, physically locked me out of my own home. Panic seized me. I stood on my own doorstep, locked out, while my entire life was inside. My laptop, my work files, my clothes, my photos, my passport, everything. I banged on the door, shouting John's name. "John, open this door right now. This is illegal." There was no answer. I called his phone. It went straight to voicemail. I called again and again, my desperation growing with each unanswered ring. I was completely locked out. The full weight of their betrayal hit me. This wasn't just an entitled demand made in the heat of an argument. This was a premeditated act. They had planned this. They had gone out, bought new locks, and installed them while I was at work, effectively seizing my property. I sank down onto my front steps, my head in my hands, tears of rage and helplessness streaming down my face. My neighbors, an elderly couple who usually waved, peeked out their window and then quickly shut the blinds, clearly not wanting to get involved. I felt utterly alone and exposed. After a few minutes of numb shock, Rebecca's voice echoed in my head. "Handle this legally, not emotionally." I took a deep, shaky breath, wiped my tears, and pulled out my phone. I didn't call John again. I called the non-emergency police line. "Hello," I said, my voice surprisy. "Angli steady. I'd like to report an illegal eviction. My tenants have changed the locks on my property, and I am the homeowner." The dispatcher took my details and told me a patrol car would be dispatched. As I sat there on the cold concrete, waiting for the police, I felt something shift inside me. The sadness was being burned away by a cold, hard resolve. They hadn't just betrayed me. They had declared war, and I was going to finish it. The arrival of the police cruiser felt both surreal and validating. 2 officers, a man and a woman who looked calm and professional, walked up my driveway. I stood up, clutching my purse, my heart pounding. I explained the situation as concisely as I could. This was my house, my brother and his girlfriend were living with me, and they had changed the locks without my permission. I had my driver's license with my address on it, and I was able to pull up my property tax records on my phone to prove ownership. The male officer knocked firmly on the door. After a long moment, the door opened a crack and John peeked out. He looked terrified when he saw the police. "Sir, we've received a call from the homeowner, Ms. Fiona," the officer said, his tone neutral. "She's stating you've illegally locked her out of her residence." John stammered, "There's a misunderstanding. This is our house too, we live here." Megan appeared behind him, her arms crossed over her chest. "She doesn't live here anymore," she said defiantly. "We had an agreement." The female officer stepped forward. Ma'am, unless you have a lease agreement or a deed with your name on it, this is her property. You cannot change the locks and deny her access. That's an illegal eviction. Megan started to argue, but the officers were firm. They explained that this was a civil matter, but that denying a resident access to their home was unlawful. They couldn't force them to leave, but they had to let me in. Reluctantly, John opened the door. The officers escorted me inside. The tension in the house was so thick I could barely breathe. Megan glared at me with pure hatred while John refused to look at me at all. The officers advised me that to avoid further conflict, it would be best if I gathered some essential belongings and stayed elsewhere for the night while I sorted out the legal process. They gave me a case number and told me to document everything. They made it clear to John and Megan that they were not to prevent me from entering the property again. While the officers stood by, I hurried to my room. My hands were shaking as I threw clothes, toiletries, my work laptop, and important documents into a suitcase. I felt violated, as though my personal space had been contaminated. I could feel Megan's eyes on me the entire time, a silent, hostile presence. As I was leaving, I walked past the office, the room Megan had earmarked for her nursery. The door was slightly ajar. On the desk, I saw a stack of mail. Curiously, I glanced at it. They weren't just my bills. There were letters addressed to John and Megan. Credit card statements, bank letters, packages, all sent to my address. This was more than just a convenience. They were deliberately establishing a paper trail, creating proof of residency to strengthen their claim on my home. The premeditation of it all was chilling. I spent the night at Rebecca's, sleeping on her couch. We stayed up late, fueled by coffee and righteous anger as I recounted the day's events. The mail was a crucial piece of the puzzle. "They're not stupid," Rebecca said, her legal mind whirring. "They've been planning this. They're trying to establish tenancy rights that are harder to terminate. Changing the locks was their power move, an attempt to seize possession and force you into a long, drawn-out court battle." She pulled out a legal pad and began scribbling notes. But they made a huge mistake by doing it so aggressively. The illegal lockout is a point in our favor. It shows bad faith. The next day, Rebecca began drafting the official notice to quit, the legal document formally demanding they vacate the premises. She made sure the language was ironclad. While she handled the paperwork, she gave me a task. "I want you to talk to your neighbors," she said. "The ones who closed the blinds. Talk to them. See what, if anything, John and Megan have been saying." I dreaded the idea of airing my family's dirty laundry, but I trusted Rebecca. I went back to my house the next afternoon. John's car was gone, but Megan's was there. I used the key she had been forced to give me and let myself in. The house was quiet. I went straight next door and knocked. Mrs. Gable, a sweet woman in her 70s, answered the door. She looked nervous but invited me in. "Oh, Fiona, dear, I'm so sorry," she said, her voice a whisper. "We saw the police yesterday. Is everything all right?" I explained the situation as simply as I could. As I spoke, her expression shifted from concern to indignation on my behalf. "I thought something was strange," she confided. "That young woman, Megan, she told my husband and me a few weeks ago that you were moving for a big job opportunity in another country. She said you were giving them the house because you wouldn't need it anymore. She said you wanted your first nephew to grow up in the family home." I was stunned. They hadn't just been planning to take my house. They had been actively constructing a false narrative, lying to my neighbors to legitimize their theft. They were painting me as the generous, absent sister, making their takeover seem like a gift rather than a hostile seizure. The lie was so insidious, so manipulative. It was designed to isolate me, to make anyone I might turn to for help question my side of the story. I thanked Mrs. Gable for her honesty. Her information was invaluable. It demonstrated a clear pattern of deceit and intent. I immediately called Rebecca and told her what I had learned. "Perfect," she said, a grim satisfaction in her voice. "This is exactly what we need. It proves malice. It's not just a misunderstanding between family members, it's a calculated scheme." The investigation had peeled back the layers of their betrayal, revealing something far uglier than I could have imagined. They didn't just feel entitled to my home, they had actively conspired to steal it, building a foundation of lies to support their claim. The hurt I felt was immense, but now it was sharpened by a new, steely resolve. This was no longer just about getting my house back. It was about justice. With the evidence of their premeditated scheme, the changed locks, the established paper trail, and the lies to my neighbors, Rebecca and I shifted from investigation to action. The plan was a multi-stage operation designed to be swift, legal, and undeniable, leaving John and Megan with no room to maneuver. Rebecca called it Operation Reclaim, and the name alone gave me a surge of much-needed strength. The first step was serving the official notice to quit. Because of their hostile actions, Rebecca advised against me delivering it myself. "There's no need for another confrontation yet," she explained. "We'll have them professionally served. It's impersonal, official, and creates a legal record that they have received the document." We hired a professional process server, a stoic man who assured us it would be handled discreetly and effectively. The notice gave them 30 days to vacate the premises. It cited the termination of their tenancy at will and was backed by my sworn affidavit detailing the illegal lockout. The server delivered the notice the very next day. I can only imagine the shock on their faces when a stranger handed them a legal document on the doorstep of the house they thought they had successfully conquered. The second part of the plan was to manage the next 30 days. I couldn't live under the same roof as them. It was emotionally untenable and potentially unsafe. But I also couldn't abandon my house. On Rebecca's advice, I installed a set of high-quality, smart-enabled security cameras covering the exterior of the house and the main common areas, like the living room and kitchen. I informed John and Megan in writing, via a certified letter, to create another paper trail. That surveillance was being installed for security purposes, which was my full legal right as the property owner. The cameras served two purposes. They would deter any further malicious behavior, like damaging my property, and they would provide a record of everything that happened. I moved the majority of my valuables and sentimental items into a secure storage unit, leaving only the bare essentials in my locked bedroom. For the duration of the 30 days, I stayed with Rebecca, only returning to the house periodically during the day to maintain a presence. During this waiting period, John tried to contact me several times. His texts were a pathetic mix of weak apologies and accusations. "Fiona, you're tearing this family apart over a house. Can't you just think about the baby? Serving us legal papers? I can't believe you'd do that to your own brother." I followed Rebecca's strict instructions. No response. I didn't answer his calls or reply to his texts. "Every time you engage, you give them an opening to manipulate you," she had warned. "Our communication is the legal notice. That's it." The silence was my shield and my weapon. It sent a clear message that the days of emotional appeals and guilt trips were over. This was a legal matter now, and I was no longer playing his game. The third, and most crucial, part of the plan was preparing for what would happen if they refused to leave after the 30 days were up. "Hope for the best, plan for the worst," Rebecca said. She prepared an unlawful detainer lawsuit, ready to be filed with the court the very morning after the notice expired. We gathered all our evidence: the police report from the illegal lockout, a copy of the locksmith's bill for when I had to regain access, a signed statement from Mrs. Gable about the lies they had told, and the surveillance footage logs. We were building a case so overwhelmingly one-sided that they would have no choice but to fold. As the 30-day deadline approached, I felt a strange sense of calm. The initial shock and hurt had been forged into a cold, hard resolve. I was no longer the accommodating sister. I was a homeowner defending her property, a woman reclaiming her life. I had followed the law to the letter, and the weight of it was on my side. Rebecca and I had a final meeting the day before the deadline. "Tomorrow is D-Day," she said. "At 9 a.m., the notice expires. I will be at the house with you. I have the number for the sheriff's department on standby. If they are not in the process of moving out, I will file the lawsuit electronically from my phone, and we will call for a civil standby to have them removed." The plan was simple and brutal. There would be no more discussion, no more negotiation. They had been given a legal directive. If they chose to defy it, the consequences would be swift and enforced by the authorities. That evening, I packed a small bag to take with me to the house the next morning. It contained a change of clothes, my toothbrush, and the new set of high-end locks I had purchased. I was not just planning to get them out, I was planning to immediately erase their presence, to physically and symbolically reclaim every inch of my home. The fight had been exhausting and emotionally devastating, but as I went to sleep that night, I didn't feel fear. I felt ready. The plan was in motion. The structure was sound, and the foundation of their deceitful world was about to crumble. The morning of the deadline was overcast and gray, the sky a perfect reflection of my mood, somber but determined. I picked Rebecca up at 8:30 a.m. She was dressed in a sharp business suit, carrying a leather briefcase that held all our documentation. She looked like a warrior ready for battle, and her confidence was contagious. "Ready?" she asked as she buckled her seatbelt. I took a deep breath. "As I'll ever be." We pulled into my driveway at exactly 8:55 a.m. John's car was there. Megan's was too. There were no moving boxes on the lawn, no U-Haul truck in sight. They were still here. They were actually going to defy the legal notice. A flicker of the old hurt surfaced, the disbelief that my own brother would push things this far, but I quickly extinguished it. This was not the time for sentiment. At 9:01 a.m., Rebecca looked at me and nodded. "They're officially trespassing." She pulled out her phone. With a few taps, she electronically filed the unlawful detainer lawsuit with the county court. The first shot had been fired. Then, she dialed the non-emergency number for the sheriff's department. "Hello, I'm calling to request a civil standby for a tenant removal," she said calmly, providing the address and the case number from our initial police report. "The legal notice to vacate has expired, and the occupants have refused to leave." She was told a deputy would be there within the hour. Now we waited. We sat in my car, watching the front of my house. It was a strange feeling, being a spectator to the reclamation of my own life. About 40 minutes later, a sheriff's patrol car pulled up behind us. A tall, imposing deputy stepped out. We met him at the end of the driveway, and Rebecca efficiently explained the situation, handing him copies of the notice to quit and the confirmation that the lawsuit had been filed. He listened patiently, nodding. "All right," he said. "Let's go talk to them. I'm just here to keep the peace while you secure your property." The three of us walked to the front door. The deputy knocked loudly, his fist rapping against the wood with an oath. Riddy I could never have mustered. The door opened, and John stood there. He looked like he hadn't slept in days. When he saw me, his face crumpled. When he saw the deputy, it hardened with a sullen resentment. "John," I said, my voice steady and clear, "the 30 days are over. You were legally required to be out of my house by 9 a.m. You need to leave. Now." Megan pushed past him, her face a mask of fury. "You can't do this," she shrieked, her voice shrill. "We live here, I'm pregnant, you're throwing a pregnant woman out on the street." The deputy stepped forward slightly. "Ma'am, this is a civil matter that is now being handled by the courts. The owner has the right to be in her home, and you no longer have a legal right to be here. You need to gather your belongings and leave the premises peacefully." Megan turned her rage on him. "You can't tell us what to do. We have rights." Rebecca stepped in, her voice cutting through Megan's hysteria like a knife. "No, Megan, you don't," she said, her tone icy. "You had the right to a 30-day notice, which you received. You have now chosen to become trespassers. Every minute you remain on this property, you are breaking the law. The deputy is here to ensure that Fiona can take back possession of her home without being threatened or harassed by you." She then turned to John. "John, I strongly advise you to listen. Don't make this worse for yourself. This will go on your record. It will make it incredibly difficult for you to rent anywhere else in the future. It's over. Pack your things." John looked from Rebecca's unyielding face to the deputy's stoic presence, and finally to me. In my eyes, he found no softness, no flicker of the sister who had always bylaid him out. He saw a stranger. Defeated, he turned around. "Megan, we have to go," he said quietly. "It's over." Megan let out a sound that was half sob, half scream of frustration. She glared at me one last time. "I hope you're happy," she spat. "I hope this big, empty house makes you happy." Then she stormed back inside. The next 2 hours were excruciating. The deputy waited patiently outside while John and Megan chaotically threw their things into garbage bags and old suitcases. There was the sound of drawers slamming and angry, muffled crying. I stayed on the porch, not wanting to go inside while their toxic energy still filled the air. Rebecca stayed with me, a silent, supportive presence. Finally, they were ready. They hauled their bags out to their cars, their movements jerky and resentful. John was the last one out. He stopped in front of me, his car keys dangling from his hand. "Fiona," he started, his voice thick with emotion. I'm sorry." I looked at my little brother, the boy I had protected and cared for my whole life, and I felt nothing but a vast, hollow emptiness. "No, you're not," I said, my voice flat. "You're sorry you got caught. You're sorry there were consequences. You were never sorry for trying to take my home." "Goodbye, John." I didn't raise my voice. I didn't cry. I just stated the truth. He flinched as if I had slapped him. Without another word, he turned and got into his car. I watched as they both drove away, their cars disappearing down the street, taking a part of my life with them that I knew I could never get back. The confrontation was over. There was no shouting match, no dramatic victory, just a quiet, decisive end. I stood on my porch, the key to my own house in my hand, and prepared to walk back inside alone. The moment John and Megan's cars were out of sight, the deputy gave me a nod. "Looks like things are resolved for now, ma'am. Let us know if you have any more trouble." I thanked him, and he and Rebecca and I stood in silence for a moment, watching him drive away. The quiet that descended was profound. It was the sound of a battle won, but the silence inside the house was the real challenge. Rebecca put a hand on my shoulder. "You did it," she said softly. I nodded, but I didn't feel victorious. I felt drained, hollowed out. "Let's get those locks changed," she said, her tone shifting back to practical. Her focus on the next immediate task was exactly what I needed. We called the locksmith I had on standby, and he arrived within 20 minutes. As he worked, methodically replacing every lock on every door, the house began to feel a little more like mine again. Each click of a new tumbler settling into place was a small step towards reclaiming my sanctuary. When the locksmith was finished, Rebecca gave me a hug. "Call me if you need anything at all," she said before leaving me to face the wreckage alone. I walked through the house, room by room. It was a disaster. In their hasty departure, John and Megan had left a trail of chaos. Trash was overflowing, dishes were piled in the sink, and the guest room they had occupied was filled with things they had either forgotten or didn't want. Old clothes, cheap trinkets, a broken lamp. It was as if they had tried to shed their old life inside my walls. The air was thick with the ghost of their presence, a lingering scent of Megan's cheap perfume, and the faint, sour smell of resentment. I spent the rest of the day cleaning. It was a methodical, therapeutic process. I threw open all the windows, letting the cool autumn air flush out the stale energy. I scrubbed the countertops where Megan had planned her takeover. I vacuumed the floors where my brother had stood and betrayed me. I stripped the bed in their room, stuffing the sheets and blankets into a garbage bag. I didn't want to wash them. I wanted to incinerate them. With every bag of trash I took out, I felt a little lighter. I was not just cleaning my house, I was performing an exorcism, purging the space of the anger, entitlement, and sorrow that had soaked into its very bones. By nightfall, the house was spotless. I ordered a pizza, sat on my thankfully still white sofa, and ate it straight from the box. The silence was no longer threatening. It was peaceful. It was mine. The days that followed were about rebuilding, both my home and myself. I repainted the guest room a calm, neutral sage green, erasing the last physical reminder of them. I rearranged the furniture in the living room, breaking the old patterns. I reclaimed my home office, which had felt contaminated by Megan's nursery ambitions. I filled the house with new plants and fresh flowers. Slowly, painstakingly, my house started to feel like a home again, my home. I didn't hear from John for a month. Then, a letter arrived. It was a long, rambling apology, full of excuses about the stress of the pregnancy and Megan's influence. He wrote that they were staying with Megan's parents and that things were hard. He asked if we could talk, if we could find a way to be a family again. I read the letter once, then I put it in my shredder. The Fiona who would have accepted that apology, the one who would have rushed to fix her brother's problems, was gone. She had been evicted from her own life, and in her place stood someone stronger, someone with clearer boundaries. My love for my brother had been a foundational part of my identity, but he had dynamited that foundation. You can't rebuild a house on rubble. My relationship with my parents became strained. They were caught in the middle, loving both their children but unable to comprehend the depth of John's betrayal. They urged me to forgive him, to think of the baby. I had to explain to them, painfully, that my forgiveness was not something John was entitled to. It was something he had to earn, and he hadn't even begun to try. Our calls became less frequent, a sad casualty of the fallout. It's been 6 months now. My house is quiet, peaceful, and entirely my own. The security cameras are still up, a subtle reminder of the battle I had to fight. Sometimes I see a post from one of Megan's friends on social media showing a picture of their baby boy. I feel a faint pang of sadness for the aunt I was supposed to be, for the nephew I may never know. But the sadness is fleeting, replaced by a profound sense of peace. I lost a brother, but I found my own backbone. I learned that some structures, even those built on love and family, are not meant to stand. Sometimes you have to tear them down to the studs and build something new, something stronger on your own terms. And my new foundation is made of steel.